From the labyrinth of loops to the variable valley, we'll see the cliffs of value first. JavaScript's right up your alley. Built-ins, bluff, files, spas, array, archipelago. Declarations in a desert where you'll find out how far you'll go. Learn to program, take a ride, buy a ticket, step inside. All aboard, you're at the station to increase your education. Bon voyage, skinny dip! As long as functions you don't skip on this, the JavaScript road trip.
Hope you've enjoyed those last few levels, and now we're going to take a little bit of a different fork in the road and look more in depth at some JavaScript data structures, specifically the JavaScript object. As you might expect, objects are a huge and powerful aspect of the object-oriented programming languages, and objects in JavaScript are no exception at all. In this level, you'll be looking at how objects contain multiple pieces of related data in one container, as well as how to access and manipulate that data, as well as how to build functionality that an object can own all by itself. Now, this level's kind of chunky, but if you stick with it, it'll soon be smooth sailing for all of your JavaScript object-oriented programming skills. So with that, it's time to dive in. Here's the ocean of objects. Welcome back. This is level 4, the ocean of objects. Hope you had a great amount of fun hoisting your hearts out in the last challenges. Let's move on to exploring the object. What is an object? Well, an object is a container of related information. There will be multiple pieces of data called properties that are grouped within an object. Let's take a look. When we have an object in JavaScript, there are multiple properties that belong to that object. And we can represent everyday stuff with JavaScript objects. Since common things usually have these bits of related info, they will often make really great object examples for JavaScript. So let's take a look at an object. This is called a book. You know what a book is, right? They're like kind of dusty in the corner in your room. Yeah, those are books. Anyway, we have here some properties of a book. One would be the title of the book. That's a property. How about the author? As well as the publisher, the number of chapters, the number of pages, and the illustrator of the book. These are all things associated, bits of data associated with the book. We could also have a box. Some properties associated with the box might be the height, the width, the length, as well as the volume, the material it's made of, and whatever's inside it, the contents. Now, because an object contains multiple bits of value put together, it's often called a composite value because there are multiple pieces. Just like with everyday objects, properties can point to specific amounts or qualities for that object. So here we could have the height being 6, the width is 8, and the length is 10. Therefore, the volume would be 480. The material it's made of is cardboard in this case. Notice that's a string. And the contents could be this thing called books array, which is probably an array of all the books that are inside the box. Properties, as you may have noticed, can refer to numbers, strings, arrays, functions, or any number of things, including other objects. Let's try now to create an object with JavaScript. Now, there are multiple ways to build objects in JavaScript, but we're going to look at an easy way, probably the one most often used. It's called the object literal. We'll start here by declaring a variable. We'll call it myBox, and then we'll assign to it an empty set of brackets, followed by a semicolon. Now, the curly brackets say to make a new object in JavaScript. In this case, however, it's empty because we got nothing in it. To add a property inside of an object literal, we give the property a string name, followed by a colon, and then assign a value to that property. We could do that multiple times. The properties are just separated by commas. So we got our width now, our length, and our volume. Let's add the material, and we'll also add the contents, but now we will go ahead and list out an entire array for the contents. Sweet, now we've got a box object that's complete with all of its properties. A cool thing about objects, especially when you initialize them, is that they will accept variables. So if instead we didn't want to put the contents as an array inside the myBox, we could build the array outside the object and then just pass in the variable that holds that array. Now we've got a reference to the books array inside MyBox. Great, so we got an object. Well, what do we do with it? Typically, objects are used because you want to refer to their properties together. So let's take a look at how we can peek at a particular property inside of an object. Remember when we accessed the length on strings and we used the dot operator? We're going to do that again here with objects. So if we wanted to find the width inside MyBox, we would do MyBox.width, and that accesses the property, and we get 8. Sweet. If we wanted the materials to do the same thing, look, it pops back cardboard as a string. And if we wanted to access the contents, we would do mybox.contents. Now what happens there when we ask for mybox.contents? Well, MyBox looks inside at the contents property, sees the books array variable, which refers to the books array outside the object, and that is what gets returned, the entire books array, which you can see here. Changing property values inside of objects is one very useful aspect of objects, and we can do that with the dot operator. If we wanted to change the width inside of our MyBox object, we would just call mybox.width again and set that equal to 12, which will change the width inside the object to 12. We can show that by logging out the property mybox.width, which shows a very nice 12 now as a result. Uh-oh, though, that makes our volume incorrect. So we're going to have to do something about that. We're going to set the mybox.volume equal to the length times the width times the height, which is what volume is, right? This is a good example of how you can use properties of an object to impact other properties within that object. And now we get a nice volume of 720, so everything is right with the world. What happens if we wanted to modify the contents of our box? We want to put a new book inside our box. Well, we would call mybox.contents, and that returns an entire array, the entire books array. And with that, we can apply all of the array methods that we already know from Road Trips 1 and 2. So let's push on that array, On the Road by Jack Kerouac. You can see that very quickly On the Road is added to our books array on the outside. But whoa, how did that happen? How did we modify the external array outside of the MyBox? The thing is that when we passed in books array as a variable, all that does is make a reference to the external array. And it doesn't create a brand new copied array. Very important to understand. So that when you get that array back from mybox.contents, it's going to be the external array. And when you push to that, you're going to add it to the external array. Now if we were to log out our mybox.contents, we'll refer to books array, and we get the entire newly adjusted array. Also, just to show that we mean what we say, if we log out the books array, we will get the same exact array. Another cool thing about objects is that you can continue to add properties even after you have built your object literal. Even after that object is created, you can throw as many properties in there as you want. For example, if we wanted to add a weight property to the box, we could do mybox.weight and set it equal to 24. When you do this, the MyBox object is going to hunt around inside itself for the weight property, and finding none, it will create one for you and set it equal to 24. We could also add a couple destinations for the box. If we did mybox.destination1 and set it equal to Orlando, that would show up inside of our MyBox. And then if we did a destination 2 and said that was Miami, that would also show up. We've got a second way of accessing or creating properties that's just as important and sometimes more important than the dot operator. That's the bracket method. You can think about this as similar to accessing array indices. The thing about these brackets, as opposed to the brackets you would use on arrays, is that you must pass in a string in order to reference the property. So here, if we wanted to find the volume property using brackets, we would pass in the string volume, and it would give us 720. If we also wanted to find the material, we would do the same thing and get back cardboard. You can think of an object just like an array, but whose indices are accessed with strings instead of numbers. Here's a pretty cool thing about the whole bracket and string access. If you want to make properties that have spaces between the words, that's totally fine, because the object just looks for a string and will find whatever string name you have provided, or create whatever string name you have provided. So here, if we wanted to add the number of stops that our MyBox is going to make, we could do that with a nice string. Notice the spaces, number of stops, and set that equal to 2. You got to be real careful with those property names that have spaces though, because if you try to log out mybox dot number of stops, you'll get an error. That's because there's no such thing as a dot string. You can't access a property with a dot string. It's always got to be bracket string or dot, a string name with no quotes. In this case, when you want to access your MyBox number of stops, you have to use a bracket. Yet another cool thing is that those brackets will accept expressions, and that's going to enable us to get dynamic property access. That's going to enable us to avoid hard coding every last property access that we would want. Let's take a look. So here we got a for loop. We establish a loop counter, and we're going to loop over the entire amount of stops that our MyBox goes through. And then we're going to log out each destination. How are we going to do that? We're going to access each of the destinations 1 and 2 by using a dynamic expression inside of the bracket. Notice that we've got a string destination plus the loop counter. Notice the loop counter starts at 1. So as this loop progresses, we would get an expression destination 1 and destination 2 inside those logs. And what will we get? We'll get Orlando, and then we'll get Miami. In this way, you could continue to add destinations to your MyBox, and it would be able to log out each one with this simple loop and the bracket expression. Here's where it gets interesting, because our contents could actually be individual objects. Each book that's in our contents property could actually be its own book object. Let's take a look. First, we need to delete our contents property with the delete keyword. Let's see what we can do here. So there's the delete keyword, and we say delete mybox.contents. Notice the syntax. What's going to happen here is that the delete keyword will completely delete the entire contents property. It will not be there anymore. It's not just deleting the books array variable and leaving the contents name there. Nope, property is gone. From our delete command, we get a true back saying, yes, we have deleted the property. If we now log out console.log books array, we still get the same array. That's because we haven't actually deleted the array, we've just deleted the property that references the array inside of our object. Now, you got to be careful about that delete command, because guess what? It's always going to return true. If I tried to delete mybox.nonexistent property, we get a true back. What? Weird, it was never even there. Now, why is that? You should think about the delete command as asking, is this property gone after it has been deleted? So, of course, if it looks for something and it's not there, it's going to say true, the property is gone. Cool, now we'll build a function that creates book objects, and we're going to add those to our box. Wow, this is going to be fun. First, we'll need a property that tracks the number of books that's inside of our box, and we're going to go ahead and set that initially to 0. Our function will need it to dynamically assign property names in that bracket fashion that we just saw earlier. So here's our function. We call it addBook. We're going to pass in the box that we want to add the books to, the name of the book, as well as the writer. As soon as the addBook function is called, we want to immediately increase the number of books inside of our box. We'll do that with our bracket expression. Why our bracket expression? Because the string has spaces in it, so we want to be real careful there to use the bracket. Now here's where the money is. Check this out and follow really closely. We're going to call the box with an expression that is dynamically made. And what's it dynamically made from? First, the string book concatenated with another reference of the box inside which is the number of books. So you can tell that when we call this very first add book, we're going to get book 1 out of it because the very first number of books is 1. And then what do we assign to that new book property? We start up an object literal where the title property gets the name and the author property gets the writer parameter. Cool, so there's our function. Now we're getting ready to add some books. Let's do it. We'll call add book, and we'll pass in my box because that's the box we want to add the book to. We're going to add Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. First thing that happens is our number of books gets increased to 1, and we get a fresh book object inside of our my box. Notice that the correct book number in the property name has been dynamically assigned. How cool is that? Next, we'll add The Remains of the Day by Kazuo Ishiguro. That will automatically increase our number of books to 2. And add a brand new book, number 2. We see the title and the author assigned appropriately. Third, we'll put in Peter Pan by J.M. Barrie. Our number of books increases to 3. We get a new book object called Book 3 as the property. And our title and author are just fine. And then when we pass in lastly On the Road by Jack Kerouac, we'll get our 4th book and our 4th book object. Now you might ask, well, if I've got a bunch of objects inside of objects, how do I get to those deep internal properties that are inside the internal objects? Well, we can just use a subsequent dot notation to access those properties. So if I wanted to get to the title of, say, book 1, I would use console.log mybox.book1, which pulls out book 1, and then it looks at the title with that next dot notation. And what do we get? We get Great Expectations. Another way of doing that, of course, is with the bracket expression. So we could use mybox on book 4, which pulls out the book 4 object, and then looks at the author property inside of book 4, which gives us Mr. Jack Kerouac. Wow, so your brains are filled with object knowledge at this point. So we're going to give you some challenges to kind of mess around and play with objects, add stuff, delete stuff. It's going to be great fun, and we'll see you back in the next section.